So I'm going to start with something really old. This is a piece I did when I was right out of undergrad, and it was probably this tall, and it's called Birdhouse. And when I was in undergrad, I blew glass at Alfred University, and I was really not very good at it at all, but I did blow these lenses. I would make these lenses out of glass and grind them down, and I would tape them to the front of a video camera and take videos, and it would be kind of cool. So when I graduated, I had all these lenses, and I started putting them into sculpture. So this is the first piece that I did that with. So it's wood, it's found wood, and I put hinges on the box, and I filled the box with a bunch of stuff, and when you looked into the box, you could see different kinds of things sort of transformed because of this thick glass lens. And along the same lines, this is another one of these lenses, and this is a column, and I just drilled through the column and put the lens on one side, and the wings, these wings, they're cast in resin, and with this lens it flipped everything, so in the distance you could see across the river into the city, and everything got flipped. Around the same time, you can kind of see the similar kind of tall, narrow form happening. I was using negatives. You can see these little glass bits, they're sort of negatives, the old negatives from photography. Nick would probably know when people were using those. You find them in junk shops sometimes. And I made this kind of figure. This piece is also really tall. It's probably like this tall. And I was also making these sort of faces that are these sort of blank, kind of a blank, expressionless face in a way, which you can see here. And you can see a bit in that piece, Dunson in the sleeping woman on that wall. So that sort of began at this time. And along the same lines, this piece has this sort of blank, expressionless face. This is called Mask. This is a box about this big, and it has white neon inside, so it lights up, and it has this sort of cone shape coming out of the top of the head, which is another sort of recurring thing that happens, as you can see there. And these are all from the 90s, so these are really old. So there are these threads that kind of move through the work. This is another neon piece. It's pink neon, and it has a ball on top of the head, and you can see that sort of ball thing happening. It kind of continues on circles. And then again, you have this kind of blank face that you kind of see here as well. And the circus theme, it's not a huge part of my work, but it does surface. And I'll come back to that in a later slide. And this is I made a couple of t-shirts out of wood, and again, it's using this sort of old negative. And this is I started to have another kind of thematic thing that has spanned the duration of my creative process, and that's, this is an image of, it's a sort of a Midwest plain with a house and a wind turbine. And to me, it seemed like it sort of captured this maybe Dust Bowl kind of empty, windswept, kind of old, abandoned kind of place. And that's something that appears in my work, this kind of feel of emptiness and abandoned spaces. And houses as well. So there's a house, and then here I have, this is getting a little bit later, early 2000s, schoolhouse, and it's made from wood, obviously, and on wheels, and it hangs between two walls, and it rolls back and forth. So it's a house form, which happens in my work. And on the back of this, this is one of my early text pieces. I started to bring words and text into my work. I just carved numbers 1 through 10 made by me, and I carved them out and I filled them with resin and polished it down. This is another neon piece, and again you see that sort of vertical cone shape coming out of the head. It's called American Tea House. It's sort of a play on Japanese tea house. I've been, I look to Japanese design for my work. It's just this sort of natural thing that I'm attracted to. And this was more like American. I think about how people watch TV all the time, and you see the glowing blue light. And it's not that simple. It's not just a house with a TV in the window, but it has that sort of the glowing light of some kind of life, digital life inside a home, a little bit of a science fiction kind of a feel, which you can see in this piece, which is part of that sculpture back there. So we have this this blue light coming, and it's vague. There's a vague presence inside these dwellings. And I'm back to this piece. Again, this has this sort of, I'm going to go back here one more time. So this has this sort of windswept, there's a wind. You can hear the wind playing in the background. The doors opening and closing. Is somebody in there? Has somebody left? It's vacant. It's sort of vacated, windy, abandoned place, which is what I was getting at here a bit. So there's this sort of conceptual thread that has spanned. This piece, let's see if I can make it go. So this is going back to the circus idea. This is a little sketch I did. Fast forward a couple of years, I went to graduate school and I studied digital media, which is very broad, and I studied animation. And this is a little sketch I did we've got a cat juggling, the lady on the acrobat on the horse, and the bear going back and forth on the tightrope. So fast forward to years later, the piece in the blue box I used, because animation, some animation is frame by frame. You draw each frame, and it's tedious and it's fun, but it's really time consuming. So I used the movements of the bear to make the woman. So instead of starting from scratch, it's basically the same. It's the same posture. Back at, let me see if I can make it play again.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How did you do that? Because the shape of the bear is very different.
Oh, well, what it is, it's just the, it's basically just taking the bend of the knee, the bend of the leg, and just this sort of, it's maybe 4 frames down and 4 frames up. 4 frames down and 4 frames up. So it's just the legs, because the arms are stationary, so it's really just that leg movement. So I said, I'm just going to use the bear. So you can see it's the same angle, but it's a very different context. So in graduate school, I learned digital media, and I learned animation and motion graphics. And when I got out, I thought, how cool would it be if I could somehow incorporate a screen into an object? And it took me a couple of years to kind of figure it out, because there's a lot of technical stuff that one has to figure out to make that work. But I did it. And it's not the first piece, but this was a successful piece. It's called Oracle, and I have the sound, and I have an iPad inside the box. And I'll probably circle back around and talk about the work that's in the gallery and I'll just keep going with my history. So when I was in grad school, I did animation, and I didn't pursue it very much after grad school as a career, but I incorporated it into all of the stuff that I do. And I did a 10-minute animation as my thesis, and I'm just going to play a 2-minute excerpt of it, and it should give you a little bit of it. You'll see how it sort of ties in to some of the stuff that we see here. So it continues on, and these two acorn guys have this adventure, and they go on, and they end up trying to find the hat, and there are other characters. But it ties in to some of the stuff I'm doing because, well, there are a few ways. They go into this tree. They go into the tree, and they find a new world. There's a new adventure. There's a secret thing happening inside the tree, this whole other land. And I think that's what I'm sort of trying to do with some of these pieces where you look inside. There's this whole other world, this other story and other world inside the boxes. And also the characters, those two characters have a bit of this, it's almost like the Harlequin, this sort of Harlequin character that seems to appear in my work. Fast forward a few years later. This is a piece that I'm starting to think about. There's sort of a capturing of some kind of action, and what I'm trying to capture here in a sort of broad, vague, abstract sense is sky and earth, and some kind of connection between what might be happening in the sky, and these are little brass stars. It's like a little brass constellation. Something that's happening in the sky is coming out, this is wire, and coming down through this sort of mid-plane, and then there's more wire coming down. So that's something that is happening a bit in this piece. So this piece is called Heaven. So there's some kind of connection between an upper place and a lower place. So there's some kind of a movement that happens between the two places. And these are static, but they sort of represent a dynamic, some kind of dynamic action that might happen. And a similar thing is happening in this piece. This is called System. So there's sort of, it's a tall wall piece. There's a sort of system of things that are happening from top to bottom. And here I have this long, a wire that's coming down from this point, and it's hanging here, so there's a sense of something's connecting from top to bottom, and I have the cone shape again. So there's this top to bottom, upper to lower kind of transference of information or dynamic that I'm trying to somehow communicate visually. And this piece is, I consider this sort of a sketch, actually. It's trying to make it play. It's wood on brackets that comes out of the wall, and 2 pieces of wire, and just a ball that rolls across. And I think part of what I try to do in my work is just the simple sort of recognizing simple movements, like this piece here with these, just the simple, in a way, it's enjoyable, just moving these around and moving them on the wire. It's just a very, that's why little kids, they're toys, because there's something very sort of pleasurable about the simplicity of this kind of movement. So it's not too complicated. And that's sort of what, just the simplicity of the arch with the ball at the bottom. It's just this sort of simple thing that's, I think for me, it's visually graspable, and it's a sort of a pleasant thing to look at. And let's see. Well, that's it for my history, my little brief history of my art. And I can go on and talk a little bit about the pieces in here. Does anybody have any questions?
Who would are there any artists that you sort of look to as, either maybe aspirational or influential in different ways? And it could be people everyone knows, people no one knows, I don't know, someone that you...
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, there are video, like Namjoon Paik, the video artist. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's somebody that, influenced me when I was a lot younger and just got me into the whole video thing. Yeah. And, it just helped me to understand the boundaries of that are, infinite. It's funny. I mean, there's Magritte, that's sort of an homage to Magritte. I wouldn't say I look toward Magritte, but I love the work. Yeah. So there's a thing where you love the work, but then who do you look toward? And I have lots of artists that I look at. Yeah. So I can't really say that there's anybody in particular. Okay. But the surrealists as a group, I think, and the Dadaists as a group too. Yeah. There's just something about that aesthetic and that process that appeals to me. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the pieces here. I'll start by talking about these 3 panels because they're new. It's sort of a new thing that I've just kind of been doing this last year. I got an iPad a couple of years ago, and I started drawing on it, and it's been great. It's a really fun tool, and it's really it allows you to do certain things. One of the things that it allows you to do without too much complication is to make patterns. So I started with that piece on the wall over there. It's called Home, and I just created. What I was thinking was, this is like a piece from somebody's wall, maybe a home in somebody's living room. And I looked at some of the old toile wallpapers where there's sort of a little story. There could be a group of people near a tree or near a well, these sort of bucolic scenes, and some of them are really, really cool. And there's a whole story that can kind of be woven into these patterns. So that intrigued me. So I made that pattern, which is sort of like a wall out of somebody's living room. And it sort of tells a story of maybe a home from maybe the early 20th century, late 19th century. Maybe there's a porcelain jug, there's a rabbit in the meadow, There are mounds of ferns. So it's sort of this bucolic thing, but then there's this strange kind of weaving line through it. So maybe there's some kind of ghostly inhabitant. And then I made the shelf. It's walnut. And I just layered it, triple, layered it and finished it. And I have a found glass bottle with some wire. There's wire coming out of the bottle, and it's coiled in the bottle, and that sort of echoes that gray kind of ghostly sort of spiraling design that's behind it. So that was my first wallpaper. And what you can do now, anybody can make wallpaper. You can make wallpaper and they'll print it for you on real wallpaper and they'll send you a roll of wallpaper. So it's become this thing that's, anybody can, the marketplace is open to, artists, non-artists, whoever wants to do this stuff. So it's real wallpaper. This is the next piece I made. It's called Magic. And that pattern's a little more complex. There are different things happening. If you get a chance to look at it closely, there are different characters in different buildings, and each character in each building has a different state. So there's a bear on a ball, and then the bear is not on the ball. There's a lion in a cage, and then the cage is empty. So there's almost like a little bit of a story happening there, and you see the circus theme kind of emerges there too a bit. And you have this sort of Harlequin character in that piece too. He's got a tall kind of a magician's hat, kind of like the dunce over here. So there's there's also a wand. The magician kind of character has a wand, and there's again this sort of swirling, spiraling, thread-like mark that's moving through the piece. And that's a mirror. That cone is a mirror. And again, it's like a circus. It's almost like the fun house or another world. And you look into the mirror and you see that world is reflected. That world exists again, but in the mirror. So what's happening there? It's this other place, this other world, like the tree in the animation, this other place that you go into. The mirror, I learned for that project, I knew I wanted a cone-shaped mirror. So I found a glass cone. And I learned how to mirror. I bought the chemicals and I actually mixed them and put them inside, and it was a really cool process. And the mirror, you do a few different things and all of a sudden this mirror appears, and it's reflective, and it's really, really cool. So you can do that on any kind of glass. You just it has to be really clean. And then you lacquer it because it's a very delicate kind of surface. So that was fun. I learned how to make a mirror. So that's the second piece of this sort of trio. And then this is the third piece. This piece is called Heaven, and it's probably the least narrative and the most abstract of the three. You have this sort of swirling, again, this sort of coiling, swirling pattern that the others have. This one connects everywhere. It never disconnects. It never breaks. So in the other ones, it's sort of broken or comes and goes. In this one, it's connected infinitely. And behind the sort of, they're almost like roots or branches. Behind that, we have this sort of yellow. Again, it's sort of the same kind of thing, but it's a bit more of a tangle. And there's this sort of Harlequin character. Something that shows up in these, I brought in it's sort of a nod to these old toile patterns. They often have this sort of fabric that hangs from a ring or a wreath. And I think it's it's just kind of something that resonates with me. This sort of hanging, something you see the weight of it by how it hangs. So I have that going through, and then this is just sort of, again, that element of maybe connecting something distant to something close, like the earth, heaven to earth, or some kind of a relationship from the sky to something solid here, something ethereal to something solid. So those patterns are fun. I think this is just the beginning of of my maybe, doing some more intricate kinds of storytelling through the patterns. Let's see, what else can I was going to touch on this piece a bit. I talked about it a little bit earlier about how it's just kind of fun, but there are words here, so I don't know, some of you probably have gotten a chance to check this out, but each of these has a word. This one says never, this one says always, and this middle one says sometimes. So it's spelled out, and I got this idea kind of came to me during COVID, like the heat of COVID when everything was crazy, and we're looking at statistics every day and seeing what's, everybody's really worried, and it's very intense, and people are trying to understand what this is and how contagious it is, and what happens to people who get it, and all of these things. And so this is sort of a way of looking at those claims, like always, this always happens, this never happens, or this sometimes happens. And maybe the most accurate is sometimes, but even that's kind of vague and in the middle. So it was this sort of, this piece is called Fortune Teller. So it's sort of, it's the ambiguous predictions of what actually is. What do we really know? It's kind of uncertain, and it depends upon whom you ask. Along the same lines, when that piece was coming to kind of a creative close in my mind, I created this animation, which is the same kind of thing. These sort of mermaid creatures are coming out of the sea, and they're spelling the words all, some, and none. So it's the same kind of thing, all, always, some, sometimes, none, never. So it's the same kind of thing. And then here, the words just disappear, because what do they really mean? Do they have a meaning? Sort of like here, they get spelled and then they get separated. They part. Sometimes they're spelling the word and sometimes they're not. So those two pieces are kind of, linked in some ways. And this piece is also linked to the empty house, because you have this sort of wind and waves and this rhythmic sound in the background and some kind of activity or action happening, staticky. I think back to artists that have influenced me. I think about the video artists from maybe the 70s and Nam June Paik, and artists that I learned about in undergrad. They talked about the medium of video was the art. And I have that in both of these pieces. The desert, that house back there, there's a TV. And the TV, it's not just necessarily empty-headed TV, but it's the static, it's the technology. It's that digital technology which becomes art. And here, when these letters are spelled out, if you look at it closely, they're static. The letters are made of static. So it's like they're made of electricity, they're made of signals, they're made of digital signals somehow. So that's something that has influenced me, the sort of history of video and the digital signal as something that can be turned into art. That's about I think all I'll talk about in detail. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay.
I just wanted to comment that what I like about how you seem very excited about the idea of making a mirror and all that. And when I look at that, I guess what I would say is that I really like that piece. And what I like about the fact is like you were excited about making a mirror, and you made a mirror. But when I look at that, I look at it as a whole piece, and I don't just think of it, oh, someone made a mirror, that's really cool. I think of it as a whole piece, and I think that there's a sophistication there that I think is really important. So it was really exciting to hear you talk about that, but it was also, when I look at that, I kind of see, like, I feel like that piece needs that mirror to really, I don't know, it makes me uneasy, but I really like that part. I'm I'm not saying it very well, but
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
They're not two separate things.
yeah,
They come together
they-
as one
They
thing.
come together. I don't see it as a mirror in the
A mirror
wallpaper.
stuck on the wall or
I really
something.
see them as a complete piece. Even though you like me, you're making a mirror, you did something really important with it.
Yeah, thanks.
I've seen it from this angle rather than head on. And I imagine if you walked around the room, I mean, it's really cool the way the wallpaper reflects in it too. Okay, I mean, that's part of the experience. And makes you go into a deeper world. It's not just the visual at that point. It's like what's going on. It's making your head work.
Yeah, well, it's the physics of the thing, in a way. It's how the light, however mirrors work. It, it reverses and it reflects.
It distorts.
So I see like heavily influence on you from like fairy tale and children's books.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I mean, it's not like I spent all of my youth reading fairy tales or anything like that. I mean, I have, I have books of fairy tales. Yeah, I mean, maybe they just were internalized. Yeah, I definitely see that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why. It's funny with art because I don't examine too closely why the thing is how it is, and I like the ambiguity even in my own process. Like putting this together was actually great for me because I'm going through my old slides and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I was doing that back then too. Sometimes it's good to recognize those things for your future process, but I think it's also good to not think too much about them and plan and use them too consciously and too deliberately. So the fairy tale thing is there, but I don't think about it that much, So I think a lot of things are probably here, but I just, maybe an art historian or an art critic could come in and say, well, this is what you're doing here, and this is what you're doing, the Freudian. But I don't think about it that much, but I do like to look at it and see the threads that move through because that's becomes really special and important to me, just to my expression. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming.